All right, let's do this. Welcome aboard, my good people. I am A.B. Osborne. I am an animation professor at Augusta University. Let me share my screen really quick and I'll introduce myself a little bit before diving into what we're talking about today. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. Let's get this out of the way. All right, so as mentioned, I am A.B. Osborne, the animation professor at Augusta University. A couple of things about me. A little bit ahead of myself there. So for starters, I've designed the animation program at Augusta University. I actually built this program from scratch and we've grown really quickly. Tons of students basically signing up all the time. I already grown and add another professor. So a lot of good things happening in animation here in Augusta. For me personally, I've worked in virtual reality, augmented reality, medical and engineering visualization, video games, classic cartoons, documentaries, motion graphics, e-learning. Worked on a little bit of everything in the animation field. And I've made it a point to do so. I want to wear a different hat every time. A lot of my clients include several Fortune 100 companies. And at the moment, for about the past, 2 years or so, I've been working on Supercell projects. The people behind Clash of Clans, Boom Beach, Clash Royale, Heyday, any other ones I'm missing? Like an upcoming one called Everdell. All those different games, I've got to be involved with some of these projects with them and through the frame yard. So I've got to really, it's been really cool to kind of work with a client that works with such cool characters. And I'm a complete animation generalist, so I've worked in every step in the production pipeline. And what I mean by that is like I can wear every hat. I've made it a point to learn how to do everything. So I'm not as good as somebody that does it all day, every day, one of those jobs, but I can jump in and out of every single job and be able to do it pretty well. Here's a few examples of just random things I made, mostly personal work on the 3D modeling side of things. A robot armadillo. Last year I made a Santa 3D model just because I really wanted to play with the Santa beard. This is a character named Malagroth, and we'll see a little bit of this character today. Malagroth's a wizard. He's got a fun voice. I am Malagroth. I am a wizard. And then I've also done a series of CGI portraits, most recently, basically taking creatures that are extinct for man-made reasons, and especially ones that you may not have heard about, and turning them into just, digital portraits. So I 3D modeled everything and built the textures and materials and pretty much made everything you see here. So this is the Xerxes blue butterfly, the stellar sea cow, and I wanted to make them kind of cartoony and aesthetic. So this is a giant, imagine like a manatee, but 28 feet long. People don't even know these things existed. And then the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. And just a few examples of some of the more recent Supercell projects I've worked on. So you probably can't hear it, but hopefully you can at least see what's happening here. And one more that just showed up a couple of days ago for Halloween. And I'm not the only person who worked on both of those shorts, but I did do quite a bit of the visual things you see there. So everything from rigging to the look of the characters, doing fur, doing cloth simulations, doing lighting and rendering, a little bit of every step of the pipeline on these shorts. I'm on the wrong slide. Is this the right? Basics. Cool. Actually, I'm going up with a couple of extra slides in there. So the basics of animation, I just always want to cover this at the beginning of anything related to this, just to kind of set expectations. You know, can't cover everything about animation in a course of an hour, but if you're brand new to animation and the game visual pipeline, I just want to give you a very solid overview of all the work that goes into the look of things. And if you are a little bit more of an industry veteran, you've worked maybe in the game engine side, you're a programmer or something like that, or maybe you've specialized in one of these jobs, I just want to maybe expand your horizons a little bit and hopefully just show you some of the other options out there when it comes to the pipeline. You never know when you're going to learn something new that'll be useful for your career. So just generally, there's 3 types of animation, and I always want to just cover those. 2D animation is your typical hand-drawn stuff. So think Princess and the Frog, your typical old school Disney film. And a lot of games nowadays use 2D. You know, Hollow Knight might come to mind as a beautiful 2D game. 3D is you're essentially working with digital puppets. And you, this is how the majority of games are made. Things like Toy Story and Shrek, where you have this digital puppet on the computer and you're moving it around over time. And that's what we're covering today is the 3D pipeline. And then there's also stop motion, you know, Kubo and the Two Strings, I Remember Before Christmas, Coraline. And there's not really a lot of stop motion in video games. I don't know, Clay Fighter, maybe, sort of. I know there was a mobile phone game recently that had like, I don't know, diorama backgrounds. But for the most part, stop motion isn't particularly popular in games. So we're focusing on that 3D pipeline. And a couple of just concepts I want to introduce us to is this idea that when you have a skill set, you tend to be one thing. You tend to be a generalist or a specialist. And the generalist handles a lot of different tasks. The whole variety, you know, they wear every hat or at least a lot of different hats. So your course of your day, you may, you know, do different things or you're always getting reassigned. A specialist does one thing very, very well, and they focus on one aspect of production. And the reason I bring that up is, oh, I'm a little ahead of myself. I think some of these slides got out of order on me. The generalist usually works at a smaller studio. They wear many different hats. They're easier to replace, but they rarely go obsolete. So if that's kind of the pathway of your career, you know, you might consider generalist. And then some people are specialists. They tend to work at larger studios. They do one thing really, really well. And with the right role, they can be very in demand, but sometimes they can go obsolete if, you know, they figure out a way to automate or make a job easier. A couple of key concepts just to understand when it comes to video games and what the market looks like. Games need animators. Games need visual artists. From AAA productions all the way to small scale mobile games, artists are very much in demand for their skills. So you got to make sure you're including that whenever you're thinking about building a game. Gamers demand more, right? As the technology improves, gamers have higher expectations. There's been backlash on games like Mass Effect Andromeda when there's poor animation quality. So a lot of game studios, especially the big AAA studios, really have to step up their game with character performance. We know that indie development is rising. A dedicated person with a computer can make everything for an application all by themselves. And of course, there's tons of jobs in the United States right now. You know, when the video game market, once upon a time, Japan was the king, but so much is going on in the United States. And COVID has been great for the game industry in general. Not great because bad things have happened, but more people are staying at home, they're playing games and entertaining themselves. So a couple of things to consider. There's a difference between a AAA pipeline and a mobile phone game pipeline. You know, a game like God of War, that's 4 to 5 years of development, hundreds of crew members. And when it comes out, maybe 5 million in sales in the first month at least $60 a pop. Look at a mobile game, something like Angry Birds, maybe 8 to 9 months for that game, around 25 people to make it, and the entire series has more than 2 billion downloads. But that's also that games as a service model. They have to keep making updates to keep attracting new people that will hopefully spend a little bit of money. A couple of other concepts just that are important to understand out here. Performance capture is really important to the visual nature of a lot of games. Not all games use it, but often a lot more photoreal games at least have some sort of performance capture pipeline. And especially in facial performances, we're starting to use a lot of specialized equipment to capture real face and full body performance to put into our games. And of course, feature films are using it as well. Also worth just kind of touching on virtual reality. A lot of people have tried out, I hate to knock this, but some people I kind of think of it as lower quality virtual reality, where you put your phone in front of your eyes, even though there's a lot of cool uses for it. A lot of people have tried that out. Some people may have tried out the Oculus, but there's a whole other level to unlock that a lot of people haven't tried out, things like the HTC Vive, now the Index. So those systems are kind of the higher end of VR. And a lot of people haven't experienced it quite as we imagine it. We imagine this future where everybody's playing video games all the time, Ready Player One. Right now, the uses are a little bit more business skewing, the gaming. A lot of gamers actually just want to sit on their butts and play a game. They don't have to get up and interact. So it's actually been more prevalent in things like surgical simulators, flight simulation, and other training. But I just think it's really important to keep your eye on that and, the future of that in the market space. And of course, augmented reality as well, right? Using your phone or a headset to put an animation over top of reality. A lot of people know Pokemon Go. Games and serious uses are both major markets. So of course, you could do Minecraft or Pokemon Go, but there's also a lot of augmented reality and business to business stuff. And it's really going to help us visualize in new ways. I kind of see a lot of this stuff as the future, and clearly a lot of bigger companies do too, as we just heard with Facebook and their Meta announcement. We all know that Microsoft and Apple are definitely working on these too. And then finally, one final concept I just want to throw out to you guys is the idea of 3D scanning and photogrammetry, where you can scan real things and get photoreal 3D models with great textures. And a lot of video games are incorporating this into their pipeline. I was excited to find out that the presentation right after this is about photogrammetry. So I just want to encourage you to stick around for that, because photogrammetry is such a fun thing, and it's really easy to do with very low costs. And you can get photoreal models just from taking a bunch of pictures and running through some software. All right, so let's get to the work side, pipeline side of things. And I really want to take you kind of through how everything gets made, the machine of the visuals in this industry. And the very first thing is you got to start with concepts, right? When a game is in that concept phase, there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of just ideas. The idea generation phase is the most fun. It's probably the one that the most people have done. Everybody's thought of ideas for games. Very few people have been able to execute on them, right? But that idea is probably what you're most familiar with, how to come up with an idea. And then you got to be able to take that idea and turn it into something tangible that you can start to set yourself up for long-term success. So for example, right here we have a Metroid Dread piece of concept art. And this is what we would call a turnaround. You can see the front, the side, the back. And this is great because you can model a 3D character from this information. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, setting yourself up for success. You can build a 3D model from what's generated here. So if you're looking at concept art, and again, this is probably something, a lot of people have drawn, so they're more familiar with this stuff. Generally the tools, pencil and paper is always a classic, right? Just standard art tools. But of course, a lot of us work digitally now. So Photoshop, Illustrator, a lot of people are using Procreate over the past few years, where you can draw directly on an iPad. And of course, inspiration, having different pieces of reference and mood boards to kind of funnel in some of that creativity. A lot of this early phase is about iteration. And whenever I deal with students, I don't want them always to take the first idea they come up with. Quality is generated through experimenting with different options. The first idea may not always be the best idea. It's better to come up with a lot of different things and just free flow some ideas, draw a lot of different things, and then start to narrow it down once you get some feedback. Speaking of feedback, the feedback loop is really important in this industry. So very rarely do you just get to design something and call it a day. Usually you have art directors and creative stakeholders that will provide notes and improve different design things before they give you the green light. Make sure everything is cohesive to the visual nature of what they're building. And of course, to finalize something, you need a cleaned up turnaround. If we're just talking characters here, you want a character sheet, you want color decisions, and you want to be able to reference it easily so you can turn it into a 3D model. Then it turns into the next step of the pipeline. So this is the one that's probably the most glamorous, one of the more glamorous ones. Everybody loves 3D modeling. You sculpt your character into an appealing form. And so when you're 3D modeling, I just kind of want to give you a big blanket overview. Some of the tools you might use would be like ZBrush, which is essentially a clay-like program. You're sculpting with clay almost. You're making the tools and decisions that somebody working in clay would use. There's also something like Autodesk Maya or 3D Studio Max, both the Autodesk programs. And they work in a very polygonal, very almost mathematical way, where you're starting off with a box and then you divide up that box and you move around polygons a little bit at a time, move around vertices. So it's a very different way of working than ZBrush. ZBrush maybe is a little bit more intuitive for organic shapes. Maya may be more organic, and Max as well, more intuitive for, more hard surface shapes. You're modeling a cup or a, something like a product. And then of course there's Blender. You got to mention Blender. Blender is a free open source tool that is very powerful as well. And a lot of people use that because it's free and it works nicely with a lot of game stuff. I still say if you're figuring out what to learn, you might as well learn what the industry is using if that's your goal is to work in the industry. So Maya and 3D Studio Max. Max is a little bit more popular with like engineering stuff. And then Maya tends to be a little bit more prevalent in Hollywood movies. And then they're both popular for games. And I feel like Maya's grown into that more so than Max in recent years. Max has lost market share, Maya's grown into that market share. And it's funny because it's the same company. And then finally, there's ZBrush. And this is something I'm just going to take a second to let you see. What is ZBrush? And so you have something like this. This is just a random, head template. And you sculpt into it. So you can actually like build off of it or sculpt into it. And if this is something you want to try out and you have an iPad, there's another program called Nomad that is kind of like ZBrush Lite. But you essentially sculpt onto these things. You can, let's go to my grab tool. You can move pieces around, get all kinds of fun shapes. It's a very powerful tool. And all you're doing is sculpting into things. So use that and eventually put enough time and effort into it, you'll get a really cool 3D model. That's ZBrush and probably one of my favorite tools. Heading back to the PowerPoint. Where are we at? There we go. So let's talk a little bit about topology because a lot of people understand modeling, right? You're making something, a shape. You're making a form, a sculpture. Well, video games think in something called polygons. And so you got to be able to take your model and make sure it's going to work great in whatever game engine you're using, whether it's Unreal, whether that's Unity or something else out there. You got to optimize your character for your game engines. So there's a couple of options within that. There's a lot of different tools you can use. You can use ZBrush or Maya or Max, 3D Studio Max, Blender, and then that's kind of the retopo side, retopology. You can also worry about levels of detail, and I'll explain what those are. So retopology is you take something very, very high res. We're talking like 9 million polygons or 5 million polygons, which would just break a game engine. And you got to get it down to something more manageable, 20,000 polygons. Let's just throw that number out there. And then you can do what's a process called baking, where you take that high resolution stuff and you basically imprint it onto the low resolution and still get the benefit of the low resolution, like it doesn't take up too much processing power. When you do retopology, you can do it. You can just hit a button and hope it works, or you can manually retopologize it. Now, anything in this industry, if it's as easy as a button click, you're probably out of the job, right? Everybody wants an easy button. So there's the automatic retopology, and ZBrush has some of those tools where it'll go and kind of build topology based on where you lay out certain poly groups. And that's fine, but it may not be the best route, especially if you're going to animate a character. Maybe an object in the background would work great with this, but if you're going to really animate a character, you might be better off with a manual retopology method. So something in Maya is called quad draw, where you actually hand place. I'll just show you really quick what I mean. You hand place, you find something. So if I wanted to go back and change these ears here, I can make this live and actually quad draw various points and lay out my topology this way. So this is a much more manual process. You'd actually have to go over the entire model and make sure it works. But quad drawing is a potential way to get your model cleaned up without, make it easy to animate. Now that's retopology. There's also something called levels of detail. And levels of detail is something, when you're in a video game, if something is close up, it's probably a good idea to have it seen with a little bit higher resolution. But if something's way off in the background, you're in Skyrim and something's way off in the distance, maybe seeing it at the highest possible quality isn't doing you any good. So a lot of game engines use things called levels of detail, where you'll have something closer to you be higher res, something further away be a lower resolution. And you can automate that process with something called Simplygon, or sometimes the game engines themselves have a built-in way to do that. So you can have, when it's closer, it might be 127,000 triangles. When it's further away, it optimizes to maybe 8,000. You don't need that detail if it's not going to be close up in the frame. So that's the retopology side. Let's introduce what comes after you built your model, texturing. So sometimes you got to make your model sparkle, and sometimes you got to do it literally. So texturing is one of those unsung heroes. You can go for a more realistic thing, or you can hand paint and go for a more stylized look, kind of like the Spyro image here. Some of the tools you might use would be Substance Painter, Substance Designer, Mari, or Photoshop. And before you paint on textures, usually you need to go through a process called UV, where you 3D model your character. After you 3D model a character, you essentially map all the places, all the polygons out on a map. So you basically take the character, unfold them, and put them onto a 2D image. And some tools can do this automatically, but yet again, more control usually means better results. So I'm just going to show you what a UV looks like really quick. Ooh, if it doesn't break on me. Here we go. So UV. There we go. So this is kind of an idea, and it's all laid out on a map, and this is just the face. But you can kind of see, like, this is the forehead, this is the mouth part, and then it's going to stretch at the places in between because that's not important. Now, one big thing about 3D models is models are really good for, making a 3D model. It's usually pretty shiny, very pristine. It's really easy to do things that are perfect and very symmetrized and things like that. However, a lot of modern textures is about making things look a little bit grungier. How do we make that realism, right? And they figured out, hey, I can put a car into a video game and make it look pretty good. But after a certain level, no matter how shiny it looks, it doesn't feel real. The way they got it to look real is to start putting dirt, scuffs, dust, edge damage, all these other little details to enhance the damage or enhance the realism. And so something like Substance Painter is really great for that. Also worth acknowledging is that texturing is really moved to something called physically based rendering. It used to be built around a lot of band-aids to get things to look right. And nowadays, a lot of the shaders are built around realistic properties on surfaces. They have a roughness value, a metalness value. And a lot of this stuff is done in a program called Substance Painter. I'm just going to demo this right now. Adobe bought them out and recently changed it to Adobe Substance instead of algorithmic Substance. But there's Substance Painter and Substance Designer. This is one of the lizard characters I showed you earlier. And you can bait maps in here. You can paint directly onto a surface. And once you've laid out the UVs, you can do all kinds of really cool things. Perhaps one of my favorites, though, is just you can slap materials on here. And so this isn't going to make a lot of sense. You have to find the right material. But just see quickly how powerful this tool is. You put a different material on here, you get a whole different thing. You can spin the light around, see what the reflections look like. If we wanted this thing to look like scales and have scales on it, maybe you look up something like lizard scales, plop it on here. Up the scale. Cool. So that's not exactly what I went with. Let's see, octopus, that's always a fun one. A little And then of course, oh no, did not have to download it. You can make things look like Swiss cheese or human skin or wood grain. And this is such a powerful tool. And once you start to unlock this, you can really get some great materials on it. You know, it takes some time to actually paint it, but Substance Painter is just a really great tool for texturing. After that in the pipeline, we got rigging. And I don't know, there's this dumb meme going around there. Everybody's like, T-pose to assert dominance. Well, in this case, we're going to assert dominance by moving away from the T-pose. Because rigging, our model is just stuck in a T-pose until we rig it. Rigging it gives us the ability to move the character around. So some of the tools you might use would be Maya, Max, Blender, Motion Builder. And then there's a lot of plugins that are auto riggers. They can automatically set up your character. You still have to put a lot of work into it, but they can make the process a little bit easier. So things like Rapid Rig Modular, Advanced Skeleton, those are some of those tools. And what you need to understand about games is that they usually have limited features compared to what a feature film can do. So Game Rig can't quite do all the things a movie can do, but it gets better and better over time, especially like on Unreal 4. They've really pushed what some of these rigs can do. You know, they've added things like blend shape support, and, you know, you can generally bake anything into one of these game rigs if you know how to go about it. There is a difference between mobile and AAA games. You know, mobile is definitely going to have a lot more limitations, but AAA games are really upping their quality and their rigs all the time. I don't know if anybody's seen anything from, I don't know, the newer Crash Bandicoot games where they go a little bit more cartoony. Like, cartoony stuff's always tricky in 3D, especially in games, and they've really been pushing some of those boundaries. And then another big question is, when you build your rig, are you going to do performance capture or not? So a lot of pipelines nowadays they have different systems where they can capture an actor's face and apply that face directly to a character. And in that way they can get a full performance there. You can also do that with motion capture, right? And then the big thing you need to know is you often need to clean it up, and you need to build your rigs for that. Moving on to the next thing is animation. So once you build a rig, you get to bring your characters to life. You get to play Frankenstein a little bit. It's alive! So you craft a performance, and the idea is to craft something that's believable. This is one of those things that a lot of people walk into it and they can walk. They assume that animating a walk will be just as easy as walking. And animating a walk cycle is very, very complicated the first time around. Some of the tools, again, are going to be Maya, Max, Blender, Motion Builder. And again, if you're using motion capture, you just need to be aware that when you walk into that, that's part of your pipeline. However, a lot of people also work with keyframe performances where you're hand keying all kinds of frames to craft really good motion. And especially on the cartoonier stuff, you can't mocap that. Anything that's stylized needs to be hand keyframed. Anytime you've got a dragon, you can't mocap a dragon, you got to hand keyframe it. So, often building action-packed or emotional scenes, and you need good reference. So the best animators are often good actors. They just don't want to be in front of a crowd. And the important thing to understand about a lot of game engines is they're built around loops. So if you have a character that's running, and then they're going to switch to a walk cycle, and then they're going to switch to an attack cycle. Like, they have these different animation trees, right? And they can blend between them. So you can go from one set of motion to another over time, as long as your rig is set up correctly. Another big unsung hero is lighting, setting the mood for your character. And it's really easy to kind of forget about lighting whenever you're building a game, but lighting is going to be kind of the future of the next generation. If you haven't noticed, there's been a lot of PlayStation 5 games that are just upgrades of PS4 games. And what do they fix the most? Lighting. Lighting's the thing that they push the most whenever, you take Final Fantasy VII Remake and you upgrade it for the PS5, it's the lighting that's going to bring it to the next level. And so, different tools might be Unreal Engine, Unity, Substance Painter. You can actually bake lighting details directly onto characters if you're using something like Substance Painter. And what I mean by that is you have a bunch of lights you want to put on a character. Well, you can just go ahead and texture the characters that they have those lights on them, and then you don't have to actually light the character. And that's done a lot more in mobile games or lower budget games that can't process quite, not the higher level games. Another big part of the future of gaming is, of course, real-time ray tracing. The more things you can calculate in real time means better lighting. And so getting more realistic shadows, more realistic reflections, that's the stuff that's really going to set gaming and up it over this next generation. And so we're just trying to upgrade everything to cinematic quality. The biggest upgrades in HD remakes, if you're going to remake a game in HD, you're not usually going to rebuild all the models and the animation. You might, but the first thing you're going to do is up-res the textures. The second thing you're going to do is improve the lighting. Cool. Well, that's kind of the timeline I was wanting to go over. Keep stargazing for the amazing. What questions do you guys have out there? What do you want to know about the pipeline? And anything I can kind of demo really quickly, I'm happy to do it.
Could you demo transferring a model that has a skeleton into a game engine?
Transferring a skeleton that has into a game engine. So there's a lot of different ways to go about that. So if you're trying to get, you've got an animated character, and I was going to show this at some point. I don't think I got around to this. So this is my character Malagrop, and he's built probably less for games and more for film, but he can work probably either way. He's built in Rapid Rig Modular, which is a relatively low-cost auto rigging tool. I think maybe like $100 or so, and it helps you set up the rig. And just to show off some of these rig things before I go over the exporting process, I've got a bunch of blend shapes, so he can talk and open his mouth. He can grin, or he can look fierce. And of course, he can smile. So you have all of these different facial controls. If you want him to look around, you can grab the eye control and I think I have to change that to something. Yeah, I have to work on that. Go wide-eyed, needs to go sad. Got controls in his ears. I've got a whole set of mouth deformers that I can turn on and off. So I can just grab anything here. And of course, the hands have a lot of controls as well. And whenever you do games, it's important you got to do everything under a single joint chain usually. And what I mean by that is there's a hierarchy of joints and everything needs to be under a one specific joint. And whenever you build your rig in this, it'll ask if you want to go that route. So of course you can move fingers. I don't think I've finished reading that part yet. Open the jaw up. Yeah, I think I disconnected that. But that kind of gives you an idea of some of these different controls. Did I rig this part yet? Yeah, I'm halfway through rigging the body. But once you've set up your character, and there's a couple of built-in things in Maya if you wanted to try it out, go over to your rigging tool tab, and there's these different skeletons, and there's one called Human IK. There's a quick rig where you can just kind of click a character and hit quick rig, and it may or may not work. On any of the automatic tools, they're always going to break on you a little bit. But there's Human IK, which is basically taking the same concept and giving you a little bit more control over it. And when you build that, it'll give you a human. And so most things in games nowadays are bipeds, not always. But this is great for exporting out. Now, whenever you export, there's a couple little quirks. If you're doing some stuff, like if your rig is pretty elaborate, sometimes you got to bake that stuff directly into the rig. You got to bake the keyframes into that. But the great thing about Unreal and Maya and Unity, all these programs understand what FBX means. And so there's a little bit of trial and error there, but they know what an FBX is. And when you export an FBX, you can kind of choose what you keep in here. So, do you keep your smooth mesh? Do you triangulate things? But most importantly, you can keep your animation, and you can bake the animation. You can keep blend shapes now. The newer versions of Unreal have added blend shape support, and I've used Unreal probably a little bit more in recent years. You can keep your constraints. Like you can keep certain things embedded in the files, and then you bring them into Unreal, and then you can bring the different sets of animation into Unreal, and then you blend between them, if that makes sense. Like opening Unreal would take about 10 minutes in and of itself, but that's what you wind up doing is you're you're kicking out an FBX, bringing it into Unreal, and you can keep all your assets there. And then you blend between your different animation loops. Cool. What other questions we got? Nope, see a raised hand, Jose.
Hello. My question is, you discussed a lot of what goes behind some of the lighting and the modeling and other aspects and animation. But when it comes to effects, let's say, for example, the character that you have on screen had the unfortunate luck of being hit with Medusa's gaze. When you're animating something like that, what's the process that goes behind changing the texture from skin and clothing to a texture of rough stone? Like a transformation? Or is that something that has nothing to do with animation and that's more of an effects thing?
Well, you've asked a great question because you kind of hit the nail on the head in that there's a lot of ways to go about it, right? So you could do it in textures, right? You could have two different materials. You could have the character as they are normally, and then you could have a stone version of that character, right? You can go into Substance Painter and, I don't know, let's see if we got stone in here. I'm sure we do. Okay, maybe it's rock. There's no way we don't have rock. Pebble. And download the new stuff. I updated the app and I lost all my presets. But let's just say that here, we'll just do plastic. There we go. We're going to convert this character to plastic. Medusa now does plastic. And so you'd have a separate one that you could build a map in something like Unreal that would blend between them. Like it's almost like it goes from point A to point B. It's like a cross dissolve. And I know there's ways you can do that in Unreal where you can kind of, transition from one to the other based on, an animation of a map over time. So that would probably be the easiest, most straightforward way to do it in a game real-time engine. If you did it in something like a movie, it's actually easier to use something like After Effects or whatever and do it in comp, meaning like you would do it after everything is already rendered. And then you could just either swap out the different renders or just apply an effect that does it automatically. But if you're doing it on Unreal, yeah, that would probably be the way you would do it. You would have one version of the model with one set of textures, and you would transition that over time with some sort of mask. Hopefully that answered your question. That's probably the easiest way about that. Any other questions? Let's see chats. I haven't clicked on the chat yet. Can you show some retopo tips and tricks? The easiest way is just hit retopo in ZBrush or Maya. Again, that doesn't give you the most control though. If I can get a fresh copy of Maya really quickly, the retopo stuff is, quad draw is my favorite way to go about it because you have a ton of control over it. In ZBrush, you can actually kind of paint guides or set up polygroups to control that. So that's not an option to roll out. But I like to hand place everything. And I actually did something like this the other day. Yeah, don't save. Let's see if I can pull this up. So, yeah, it'll take it too long to pull that up, but I'm going to just create something really quick. A weird, we've got a sphere, and we're going to make it a little bit more complicated pretty quick. Smooth. Grab that move button. Turn on symmetry, and just give it a weird shape. And so my favorite way to retopo, who knows what this is? This is your Rorschach test. You make it live in Maya, and then you go to your quad draw. Then you can just lay out points and fill in the gaps, and very quickly retopo your entire thing. And then that's great because you can, like if this was a really detailed mesh straight out of ZBrush, 4 million polys, you could not only retopo it, you could bake the high poly onto the low poly in something like Substance Painter. There we go. And then if I needed to add details, like I wanted to go back and add an edge loop here, it'll update on the fly. And if I crank up my soft select, I can smooth out things by holding shift. Just kind of space everything out. So this works great on faces. You can basically place everything exactly where you want it. That's my personal favorite way of working. There is no, there's a million ways to do everything here. I make it look so easy. Well, it's honestly, it's going to take some time, but that's the foundation. You're just laying out all these different points and then filling in the spaces. I mean, keep in mind, I've probably done all these things for years and practiced over and over again. So, but sometimes just finding a place to start can show you the right direction very quickly. And then you can figure the rest out by, looking up a few YouTube things on Quad Draw. Is there any other questions? Got maybe a couple more minutes before we got to skedaddle. When is it best to use Decimation Master, and when is it best to use ZRemesher and ZBrush? So that's a very good, very specific question. Best to use Decimation Master. So just for reference for anybody that's tuning in here, there's a Z plugin called Decimation Master, and then there's ZRemesher. Now, to me, I think the decimation, again, I mentioned my favorite way to do this is quad drawing, right? But the Decimation Master, I think, is a little bit more powerful. It gives you a little bit more control, and hopefully doesn't destroy your model as much versus if you've ever ZRemeshed, it knocks out all that detail. It just smooths everything over. And the trick to both of those, though, is often you duplicate your subtool, then you ZRemesh on your original, and then you can project back onto it, and it usually gets you your detail back. So just reiterate that you duplicate your subtool, and then you either ZRemesh or use the Decimation Master. And honestly, my philosophy is just try both, see which one gives me good results. But I would probably rate the Decimation Master higher on control. And then but I would do ZRemesher more so when I'm working on the model in the moment. And to me, the decimation is more towards the end of the pipe. Like whenever I'm done with the model, I might use Decimation Master. But either way, you duplicate that subtool, decimate on your original, and then you project with when you duplicate it, use that to project onto the other one, and it'll get you your detail back. Is it possible to make an RPG game in Maya or Unreal? With Maya and Unreal together and a few other programs, I guess you could make. Unreal is very powerful. It can do anything. The limits your imagination. My specialty is the visuals. The limit of your imagination. I've seen Unreal do tons of different genres of games. So it's really up to you and how good you are at that side of it. I'm not really a programmer. Uni or Unreal? I'm very much Unreal. Unreal's much better for visuals. What would you recommend for people who don't have money but need to use these programs? I know Blender's free, but it isn't Substance Painter, it isn't Photoshop, and may not be what an employer wants to see. Is there an everyman alternative? So one, if you're a student, a lot of these programs are free. Substance Painter is free for students for at least a year if you have a .edu email address. So high school students and college students get that. Maya, the same thing, free for students. And the reason being, they want to hook you early on. If you use Maya while you're in college, you'll go on to use Maya whenever you are making money in the real world. So Maya and Substance Painter are both free as long as you're a student. And some people seem to be a student forever and keep using it. I'm not recommending that, but what I'm saying is that like my students have access to it when they're at home, as long as their computer can handle it. Now, money does help. Being able to, but if you're going to put money on something, the one you can't easily replicate is ZBrush. That being said, there's Nomad, which is a great alternative if you're using, if you're trying to sculpt on an iPad. But ultimately, an employer wants to know you can do the thing they need you to do. So, building a demo reel, a lot of time, ZBrush and their automatic screensavers. That's always a tough thing. So there are alternatives. Blender's probably your best alternative. They get better every year. But in the end, if I'm an employer, most of the time, I just want to see that you can use the thing or you can learn the thing. Because I've worked at places that they use Max and I have to learn Max because I'm a Maya person. Like they'll be patient enough for you while you learn it. Sometimes they don't even care which program you use as long as you can make a good final product. But I would still set yourself up for success and try to use the things that everybody else is using. The Adobe Creative Cloud is not going away. And so I would say that also with Maya and Max. But they're free again with the .edu email address. All right. Well, it's about that time. Got to hand it over to the next thing so they can set up. If you ever have any questions, I'll just really quickly pull back up my thing. Feel free to follow me on the socials and head up my website if you want to shoot me an email. I love answering questions. I love talking about this stuff. And I know I covered a lot in a very short amount of time. It's meant to be a starting point, but if you ever want to learn more in the specific topic, always feel free to reach out. So down at the bottom, osborneanimation.com. There's my Twitter handle, my Instagram handle, and appreciate you guys tuning in.
Hey, AB, before you leave, got one more question for you from chat.
What do you get?
Some talk about how do you keep your 3D character pipeline running smoothly when you're in an indie studio working virtually?
Oh man, so I do a lot of virtual work right now, and I'm working again Supercell, but I work with a company called the Frame Yard. I'm working with people all over the world. How do we keep it running smoothly? One, communication. I mean, that seems kind of silly, but yeah, you have to communicate. I don't know. I honestly don't think it runs smoothly. I mean, I don't think anything runs smoothly, but having somebody that's on the ball and willing to reach out and check in and make sure people are where they're at and where they say they're going to be at what time. It's project management at that point and people communicating, because if you're kind of quietly in the void and getting behind on something and somebody else needs that next step, nothing is smooth after retopology. Yeah. It's going to be bumpy. You're going to have, in the smaller studio, the more, I think the biggest problem is when you have people jump in on projects and jump back out, the more you can get a team that builds a synergy, the better. So I would always say, just make sure you're investing in people that are going to be there long-term, hopefully, or at least get your base of people that will be reliable around you. And one of the best things I have going is that whenever I work with a lot of students, I see who's the best. When I recommend people, I'm recommending the people that I know are going to not let me down. And I think that's just work with people that aren't going to let you down, make sure you're holding yourself accountable, and get different eyes on something. If one person thinks they know how to do it and they're set on doing something, get somebody else's take on it and see if there's a better way. Because some people in this industry, they've done one thing one way forever. And then in the past year, there's a new way of doing it and nobody ever considered it. So I think that's one of the things I'm good at. I'm a good problem solver, that I like to keep my eye on all the different types of ways to work on something. So I haven't done one thing one way for 10 years. I'm always trying to learn the new way. And I think that's something a lot of people need to do.
Well, let's end with the question about communications. I agree, that is key. Are there any particular things that you think 3D modelers need to communicate to texture artists, need to communicate to animators, need to communicate to the ZBrush artists? What things often get overlooked?
What gets overlooked? Good question. I think a lot of times people set something up in the file and pass it on, assuming that the next person will know how to work in it. And I think everybody should learn a little bit of every part of the pipeline, even if you're a specialist. I try to make my students do it all at least once so they can at least communicate with other people in there. But it's when you just put something in a file and say it's done and don't explain your thought process behind it. Like if you're digging through an outliner and, people are like, oh, I thought this thing was supposed to be in here. It's not in here. Then you have to keep reaching out and asking for it.
Uh-oh, did we lose our host? Oh no. Okay, well, that is extremely unfortunate.
Yeah, that was a weird conclusion to the Zoom. Thanks, everybody.
I did want to point out that we do have our next panel coming up in just a moment. I'm going to post the link to it in the Zoom chat that we have right now. So everyone who wants to come into it, this is photogrammetry for game development. AB spoke about it a little bit, and if you are interested, I definitely recommend you attend. I am putting the link to the Zoom meeting in our chat, and everyone is welcome to come and join in. We will be starting that one up shortly. AB, we're sorry we lost you for a second there.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't. At least it fell apart at the end.
This is true.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out and keep stargazing for the amazing.